Welcome to the Music Maker's Cookbook, the podcast that helps independent artists cook up recipes for success in the music industry. I'm Sean.
I'm Brandon.
And we have a good episode today about mastering that we're really excited to dive into, kind of talk about what it is exactly, the history behind it, why it's important, different ways that you can get your songs mastered to get them released out there. But before we really dive into that, we always start off the episode with a quick question that we kind of talk about a little bit and also encourage you to respond, leave a comment, and let us know what your answer to the question is. And it is, what is the most unexpected place that you found musical inspiration? This one I think I really am interested on any sort of viewers' feedback. Yeah. Because I know in the studio I've heard some crazy stories about how people come up with songs.
Yeah, totally. Man, myself, that's really tough, dude. Because there are always like fleeting moments, and like you never quite remember it unless you actually like take advantage of that and write about it or whatever. So like, and like I don't really necessarily call myself a musician or a songwriter. You know, I'm maybe a musician, but not a songwriter. You know, so that's a great question, dude. And I'm normally like, oh, I'm gonna pass it to you because I don't know, but I truly don't know actually with this one.
I mean, if you can't think of one for yourself, like, was there anyone that sticks out to you from a client you've had that's come into the studio?
Finding inspiration in a hopeless place. Get it? Fell in love in a hopeless. Yeah. You like okay? So I don't know anything off the top of my head. I really don't. These questions are good because like I never know what to expect, and whenever you hit me with them, I'm like I don't know.
I really purposefully don't tell him beforehand.
Yeah, it's true.
I don't know just forget to bring it up until we start recording. It's all intentional. Trust me. No.
What about you? Like anything interesting? I guess like.
I was kind of hoping that you would say something, so like I kind of think about one in the background.
Yeah, no. It's a tough one, dude.
I mean, I haven't written a song in a long, long time. I guess the weirdest. Okay, I guess the answer I have to that question is I have a song called It's Time or This Time or something. I don't remember the name of my own fucking song.
Hey.
I released like 4 years ago. I think it's This Time, and the whole second verse and kind of the concept of it as a whole is about an interaction that I had with one of my cousins. It was when I was either in high school or early in college, and I have an uncle who's my youngest uncle. He had just had a kid, and so like when I was going in college, my cousin was 6 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. And when we, like the year before when we all went up north and hung out as a family and I was hanging out with him, I brought up a couple games that I figured like a little kid would enjoy, some like video games. I brought up my Retron 5 and we played some Genesis games with
Nice,
him.
Dude.
Specifically one called Dinosaurs for Hire. It's a side-scrolling shoot 'em up where you play as dinosaurs with guns.
Oh, that's awesome.
Very 90s.
Yeah.
But he really liked it. And when he came back the next year, everyone's like, hey, you remember me? And he's like, no. Hey, you remember me? He's like, no, well, I'm this. Okay, hello. And then he sees me and he's like, game guy.
You imprinted onto his memory banks, man.
So he recognized me. I was like one of the only couple of extended family members that he recognized. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. This is the first time I've really experienced kind of more of a close-up look of like seeing a kid grow up. And I was like, huh, I was that kid at one point.
Yeah.
Okay. Then the whole like mindset of like trying to do right by the younger generation and like the whole thing of like, well, fuck, are we fucking up? Do we know what we're doing? Do we not know what we're doing? Like, are they getting raised up? Like, and also, I was in high school or whatever, depression and shit. I'm like, man, being a kid is so nice because you're not full of depression.
Yeah, no, straight up, dude. It is.
So it's like, it's kind of like so the song is kind of like about growing up, about being younger, and about like, hey, when you get older, life's going to suck for a little bit because it always sucks when you're a teenager, but then you'll get better.
Yeah, dude.
So it's kind of like, that's kind of what that song's all
I like that story.
By.
I think it's a really great story. Yeah, I still don't have anything. I think what I'll just say is that musical inspiration strikes sometimes at the weirdest moments, and I'll just record it into my voice memo app and just like a melody, or if it's a song I've been working on and I'll think about something, I'll just like actually like hum it or do like do.
I have so many files on my phone.
Me too. And then I go back through and I'm like, what the fuck was this for?
What was I doing?
This is terrible. Fun fact, though, Apple just announced the new iPhone 16, which is the exact same as the iPhone 15.
I believe it.
But the coolest thing about it, though, is that their voice memo app will now allow you to layer more voice memos on top of one voice memo.
Oh.
So you can actually build out a mini little track idea.
Wait, isn't GarageBand free, though?
It is. It's a little bit more cumbersome to use, I think, though, on the phone. I've tried it before. It's a little clunky.
Okay, I was going to say, can't you technically already do that?
You can. But, like, having the ability just to have that Notes app and do, like, 2 or 3 extra tracks on top. Super cool for musicians. I keep telling everybody about it this week because I know everybody uses their voice memo. But I really like that story, though. I think that's a great story. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Very vivid story. I can picture that happening. Video game man.
Video game guy. I actually that legit. That's a line in the song too.
Oh, nice, dude.
So yeah, if you want to give it a listen and try to find out where it's being said, more than welcome to do it. But yeah, let us know what your stories are, what weird things you've been inspired by with your music, and make up for Brandon's shortcomings. I say that with love.
That was brutal.
No, it wasn't.
You called me out.
It kind of was.
You called me out.
As soon as we stop, you're going to tell me like 5 things.
I know. That happens every time.
Every single time.
I swear.
But,
and happy belated birthday to Sean.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So last week we recorded the episode on Sean's birthday.
69.
Yeah. The episode 69 on Sean's birthday.
It was
That's
nice.
special.
It was nice for multiple reasons.
That's special.
That
That's
day
special.
of recording session.
And I forgot to wish him a happy birthday on camera.
Yeah.
So happy belated birthday. Hope it was a great day.
I appreciate it. It was.
Of course. Good. I'm glad to hear that.
I didn't work. That never happens.
That's great. That's great, man. And you deserve it.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. The happy birthday wishes. But we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about music, talk about recipes, talk about things that are important. And one thing that we have not talked about yet, which I'm kind of surprised we haven't, since we are studio engineers, we are mixing and mastering engineers. We've talked about recording and mixing, but we haven't talked about really what mastering is and why you need to do it if you haven't, and all the options out there for it. We've talked briefly about the different options out there. I know when we talked about what music distribution platform to use. We talked about how some of them offer mastering, and how if your song is pre-mastered, make sure you don't select that option. Otherwise, they'll do nothing and just take money from you, or maybe they'll catch it and send it back, or make it worse. Or, and also the importance of like having a person do it. But now we're really going to dive in and kind of just talk about exactly what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think mastering is probably one of the most confusing things for people. Like what we kind of said before, it's kind of like a dark art, when you kind of think about it. And I think I really don't know the reason why it gets so confused sometimes but I think when you start kind of like unveiling the layers of production and the avenue of production, mastering becomes a clear differentiator between mixing and mastering, but it's often confused between both, right?
Yeah.
And mastering is extremely important. Like I get this question all the time: do I need to get my song mastered? What is mastering? Can you fix this in the master? Right? Fill in the blank. Do I need to select to get my song mastered when I upload it to Distributors, when I upload it to SoundCloud, because SoundCloud has it now?
Oh, they do?
They do. They do. That's only if you pay for the subscription, though. So that's the only way that it's offered. And it's often overlooked by a lot of people, too, where it's like, oh, this is mixed, I'm just going to throw it out, right? But it's like, that's maybe not the best case sometimes. Maybe sometimes it is. It all depends on what you're going for, right?
It also depends like what the other end of the way it's going to be listened to and received is, because like if it's something on like a live session or something that's getting released on Bandcamp or something, then just a mixed version, a demo version, that's fine. But if you're going to be releasing it on multiple streaming platforms or in physical media, that's where it's really important. You need to have a song mastered. Because simply put, mastering is standardizing, finalizing, and polishing a track, EP, or album so that they're polished, cohesive, sound good on as many platforms as possible, and are ready for easy consumption by the end listener.
That's a great way to describe it. I was going to ask you how you were going to define it. And that's the most perfect way to say it.
Didn't have to ask.
Didn't even have to ask.
I'm just giving out the goods.
You just brought it, man. That's some takeout right there. You see what I did there?
I did see what you did there,
man.
Well, how would you just? Would you try?
No, I would.
Would
not
you describe
add,
it any differently?
Nope, I would not add or change what you said. I think that perfectly sums it up. And there are certain requirements that you meet sometimes. Depending on what streaming platform, wherever you deliver it to is. And mastering engineers take those into account. And like Sean said, it's about kind of gluing your piece of work, your project together. together, whether it's an EP or an album, or if it's just a single, you know. And then when there are different steps to each of these project types, but mastering is mastering is mastering is mastering. And I know that's a really lame way to say it, especially without having visuals that kind of like, oh, we do this and this and this and that. But mastering is different with everything, right? And sometimes it's heavy-handed and sometimes it's not. So that's, I think, where a lot of it becomes weird too, is like, oh, you'll get a song back and it'd be like, yeah, this is definitely louder, you know, it sounds fuller, but it's like not that different. Well, sometimes it doesn't need to be, you know, it all depends on what you're given as a source material.
The best thing, honestly, a great compliment is when you send it off for mastering and you get it back and it just sounds like it's not that different, because that means the mix is solid.
Exactly.
They just upped the volume and made it, you know, presentable and even with everything else out there. Do you mind if I nerd out real quick about kind of like the history of mastering is? So the term mastering came historically from the times of vinyl production, back when it was just vinyl. Now vinyl's getting popular again, but back in the day, in the studio, things were recorded down to tape, and then from tape, they were cut into a master press for vinyl, and then the vinyls were pressed. Well, what I just said there, it was translated into a master pressing of vinyl. So the mastering engineer was the one who translated it from the cassette, from the tape, not cassette, don't ignore that, from the tape into a format of vinyl. They made the master press, the mastering engineer. Because vinyl has a much different way of reading and translating audio than tape does. It's not based on magnetic, and like the variations in the magnetic field based on tape. There are actual physical grooves etched inside the lacquer. So because of that physical nature of it, the needles can skip or whatnot. There's things they had to do in order to make it, to compensate. Yeah, they had to do a cut on the lows, boost on the highs. They would mono the bass so that the needle wouldn't jump in and out. There's all this technical thing to make a song be able to be playable and reproducible on vinyl. From there, it kind of went on to cassette. Okay, cool. Now it's going straight from tape to cassette. Well, cassettes have, they're smaller things of tape. They can't handle as much transient responses and things like that. So the mastering engineer was just kind of putting it all together so that it could be easily replicated on cassettes. Then CDs happened, and it was taking the recording and making sure it was standard for easy digital reproduction. Red Book
standards.
Yeah, Red Book standards to be produced on CDs. And then also people discovered, hey, when you're making, well, not initially, at first it was just kind of CDs was the format, but then people started getting cheap CD burners at home and are making their own mixtapes and whatnot. And there's a rule in audio of like, hey, usually louder is perceived as better, even if it's not. So something called the loudness wars started, where mastering engineers would make the song as loud as possible. So but if somebody put their song on a mixtape with a bunch of other songs, that song would sound way better because it's louder. And songs getting squished and flattened and pushed up so that the perception of it was, this is better. Then they get to streaming. And streaming realized, hey, that was dumb. Let's not have the loudness wars. Let's not crush the dynamics of the song. They had to set a standard of, hey, music is going to be this level. If it's more, we will automatically bring it down. So that way it doesn't jump out and stand out too differently from other songs. Because when you stream, you listen to different songs by different artists. It's all about creating your own playlists now. It's not as much the whole album experience. Where if it's a full album experience, it doesn't matter if the whole thing's squished or if it's very dynamic, because someone's going to put it on, set it, and make it even throughout the whole album. Whereas now it's like, they're all completely different. So we need to set the standard. So now the mastering engineer is, okay, cool. Let's get your song to meet that standard, so that way when someone adds your song to their playlist, it doesn't stand out in a positive or a negative way. It just fits. It's not altered or touched by the streaming platforms, which is also a quick misconception I want to just briefly cover real quick. A lot of people think that when streaming platforms standardize audio, they're limiting or they're compressing audio. They're not. They're literally just turning the dial down. So if they read your song as too hot, they will just bring it down, which makes it sound worse in comparison, because now there's all this headroom you're not taking advantage of. There's all these dynamics that aren't getting taken advantage of, and it's more fatiguing on the ears because it's more squashed. So you want your song to be more dynamic and not as loud when you release it on streaming platforms. So as I mentioned, historically, there's different processes for vinyl, different for cassette, different for CD, different for streaming. And that's why it's really important to have a mastering engineer, especially for planning on releasing on multiple platforms, because you do need different versions for different forms of media. And also, especially if you're looking for sync licensing and things like that, because then you need like different bit formats. You need different versions of it, instrumental, stems, like the stem mastering and all the stuff. It gets very, very complicated very, very quickly, which is kind of why it's a little confusing when we're talking about it today.
Sure, yeah.
But just historically, it is taking your song and making it so that it fits the format that it is being reproduced on.
Yep.
And historically, it started with vinyl. Now we're at streaming.
Beautiful. That was awesome, dude.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Go back and re-listen to that if you're still a little bit fuzzy about exactly what mastering engineers do, but it's a means to an end with them. And they know what they're doing. They know exactly how to deliver to certain places at certain times. Like Sean said, vinyl is very important still to this day, right? And mastering engineers will know how to get you there. And that's why vinyl has a certain charm to it sometimes too. Is because not only is that, is it warmer and is the means to reproducing the sound different than what a CD would be, but it's also a little bit of a different mix because it has to be, right? And I just think that's awesome. I think that was awesome synopsis of the history, man. That was great.
There are things you can do when you're for a mix when you're streaming it that you cannot do on vinyl.
Absolutely.
Like you can't have panned bass.
Right. Yep.
You can't have super thick 808s as easily. You'd have to have an engineer who really knows what they're doing. Totally. In order to make that translate in a vinyl
and they
pressing.
exist. They exist. Absolutely. Yep.
And then, counterproductively, because it's a whole listening experience, they might just keep the bass like lower how it normally is, but then bring everything else down so that when they have to turn up the vinyl to listen to it, it sounds bassier even though it's not. And these are the things that the engineer will know that help reproduce your song in the way that you want it, but still fits the format.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are definitely more high stakes situations too, especially when you're talking about vinyl and cassette and stuff like that, because you're spending money on actual, stock.
Physical product.
Stock and what's it called? Why can't I think of it right now? Not prints, but
pressings.
Pressings. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you're spending actual money on that. So when you get a pressing back and it doesn't sound the way that you want, well, you're out of luck for that pressing. You most likely had to buy in bulk at the same time. That's the way most of these companies work.
Some places do test pressings.
Some of them do test pressings. But yeah, like I said, there are some high stakes situations, and instead of just simply just uploading your song to streaming platforms these days. But a lot of the time, though, the focus is on streaming platforms these days.
Correct.
That is the most popular means at the moment. Whether that changes or not in the future will remains to be seen at this current moment. But right now, that's what we're focusing on. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the history of mastering, what it is, and the process of it.
Love it.
But I'm kind of curious to hear you talk a little bit about the perks of not just across medium, but like within a grouping of songs, like an EP or an album. Yeah. Like we've both done a lot of songs, probably thousands.
Honestly, at this point, yeah.
And when you're mixing an album, it's not all recorded on the same day.
Right.
It's not all recorded in the same week or the same month or the same year even sometimes. It's definitely not all mixed all in the same day.
Yeah.
And honestly, if it is, it might even be more variation between it. But what I'm trying to get at is that even on a same album with the same artist, with the same instruments, the songs will have variations between them.
They will.
Especially because caffeine intake, how tired you are, that affects your ears. It affects your ears, so it will affect the mix and how it all comes together. So when you send all these songs off to get mastered, you're getting a third-party opinion to listen and be like, okay, this song's like in the context of the whole album and in context of the reference songs that I was given. Because if you do send off a song for mastering or an album for mastering, you'll probably want to give them a couple of references of songs that you like the sound of for them to compare it to. But the mastering engineer will then be like, okay, well, this song's too bassy, this song's too trebly, this song has a lot of mid build-up, this one's got a lot of mid-low build-up. So let's edit this one, boost that one, cut this one, add this one, and now it sounds consistent and even across the whole album. So if you want to have a cohesive sound, or even just something that doesn't sound wildly different across that whole album or EP, because that's how you want it to be consumed, or at least one of the ways that it can be listened to, sending it off to a third party, another set of ears to really just make sure, okay, now it's an easy listening experience. Nothing jumps out too much in a way that's unintended.
Totally.
Now, obviously, if you have one song that is supposed to be incredibly bassy in comparison, then just let them know that, and they won't try to, make adjustments for it. If you do want that, let them know. Otherwise, now it's a much easier, consistent, professional pro level sounding album and listening experience.
Yep, absolutely. And that's really tough to do. That's really hard to do. And for the reasons you just mentioned, right? It's all recorded on different days. Most of the time these days, it's all recorded on different days. The mic placements change. So now you have different tonal changes going on in the mix. Then you have, you know, maybe like a drummer likes to use a snare on this song. A drummer likes to use a snare on this one. Then that affects the mixing. And then all of a sudden that affects the mastering, right? And I like to look at mastering in kind of two different ways. There are very specific moves like, oh, this guitar has too much low mids in it compared to this song. I'm just going to take down the low mids. And usually if it's double tracked, it's on the sides. So you just like run a nice little scoop on the sides or something. And then you're like, okay, this sounds more balanced. And then I like to look at it from a holistic perspective. How does the song sound as like a whole, right? Yeah. Is this one a little bit more mid-range forward? Well, I want to take out some of that mid-range to match it with the other track that we already had done. Usually the reference track, you know, a lot of people will ask for test masters, you know, and you know, and I just did a project a couple months ago where they were like, hey, can we get a test master? I was like, of course, yeah, no problem. And that was kind of like my reference, you know, from here on out, because that's what they agreed to. They're like, we like this, we're gonna base it off of this. But then when you get the rest of the songs in, there's differences, and that's the toughest part. That's the toughest part. But then it becomes like, okay, once we have this kind of leveled out, then we got to worry about dynamics. On top of that, that's a huge one. Because like if you don't manage your dynamics correctly in the mix, that can lead to just a terrible mastering process. Just awful, terrible, awful.
Not even just dynamics, but like also transients and whatnot. Like,
exactly.
Oh, this song is way too sharp and transient compared to the rest. Or hey, the rest of the song doesn't punch as much as the rest of the album. So we need to emphasize that.
Yep. And then you start getting into things like perceived loudness, which is just a whole nother. That one is almost a dark art, right? That one is that one's tough for a lot of people to kind of wrap their head around. It was tough for me to wrap my head around when I was doing this, and now I have like a really solid, obviously, foundation in it, and that one's really tough because then it's like, okay, well, maybe somebody does want their song really loud, like how it used to be, right? Yeah. So how do we get it there at this point? And it's not going to be using a dynamics processor. I mean, that obviously is a part of it, right? But that's not how you're going to get there. It's going to be through the perceived loudness. And then that even could go back to the mix process. So it gets very complicated and convoluted, especially when you're working on a deadline and you don't have access to the stems or the multi-tracks, right? So if you're not the one working on it, it's really hard to do recalls with another engineer because now that takes more time and the communication gets worse. And then now you're like, hey, let's change this in the mix. That can be insulting to somebody, right? That had worked on it too.
That conversation there,
and that becomes a very convoluted process. So it's almost like when you go to get your stuff mastered, it's important to have this conversation with your mastering engineer up front.
Oh yeah.
And hopefully he will spell this out for you and give you guidelines like Sean and I usually do. We will tell you this is the process. We're going to try to get through it the best that we can. And if we need to change anything, we have the ability to do so if we need, you know, or whatever the case may be. Or hey, this is the deadline. We're going to work with what we can, and we're going to get it there the best that we can. So it's a very convoluted process. That's kind of the way that I kind of think about it, though. You know, there's a lot of moving parts in mastering. When you really think that, oh, it's the final stage, no biggie, easy.
It can be very complex.
It can there's a lot of thought that goes into it. It can also be very easy too. Yeah. You know, sometimes like you said, you get a mix that's perfect, and you just turn it up, and you maybe tweak here and there, and then it's like, okay. It's good, you know. So it both sides of the aisle very quickly, quickly. But it's definitely a tough process, though.
And that's why I want to play off what you said of the whole like sometimes it has to go back to the mix or taking in the opinion of the mastering engineer. What you're really getting when you hire out or go to a professional for mastering is you are getting an outside, unbiased perspective, a fresh set of ears, someone who has worked on hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of songs that knows what a professional, polished song should sound like, and how to get your song to where you want it to go. That is incredibly helpful and positive feedback. So if a mastering engineer gets back and says, hey, based on your reference and based on this, I think you should make these adjustments in the mix so that way the master can really shine. Don't be offended by it. Right. It's like that's part of what you are paying for. It's part of what you are asking for. So even if you are, you know, starting off a conversation with a new engineer, it can be awkward sometimes depending on how the communication is and the working situation between the artist and the mastering engineer and the mixing engineer is. So even just start out by saying like, hey, if there are things you notice and you'd be changing in the mix, let us know. We want to hear your thoughts on this as a whole, not just make it sound good so we can poof it out. You know, like I'll open up the door to that next step. And you can agree to disagree on certain aspects of it, but it at least brings in a fresh set of ears on a different setup in a different room on probably, if you're going out to someone out who specifically does mastering, an incredibly expensive and well-sounding setup that's like built purposely for that in a
Very
room that's
expensive.
built purposely for it.
Yep.
So
Scientifically measured out.
yeah. So what you're getting is that set of ears, that expertise, that opinion from somebody that can look at it more objectively than you can, especially you as an artist, but even like as an engineer who's been working on it and mixing it for days, weeks, months. Like now they're invested and their ears are familiar with it too. Now you're bringing somebody else in who can be like, hey, I've not heard it before, but I know what it's supposed to sound like. This is it, or this ain't it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which raises the question of what about DIY mastering?
DIY mastering can be cool.
It can be.
In some cases, and it could apply to you depending on where you're at, maybe in your career or what your goals are. Right. If you're just uploading to SoundCloud, if you don't plan on maybe monetizing this as much, well, first of all, thank you for continuing to listen, because that usually isn't our direction, but because we want to make a career in the music industry. But if you are here listening to this, that's totally cool. That's absolutely 100% cool. If you're this word gets tossed around a lot in a bad way, but if you're a hobbyist, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, if you just like enjoy making music and you just want to get quick mastering done, you can do it yourself, or you can have it automated. Yeah, or if it's a demo, you can do it yourself or have it automated yourself. Saves you time, saves you some money too along the way. But if you're going anywhere further than that and you want to monetize it, it's always a good idea to kind of get somebody's opinion on it, in my opinion. But if you decide not to go that way because of time, budget concerns, whatever the case may be, there are tools out there to help you with that. And
before we dive into that real quick, I just want to say, as you mentioned, there are limitations of doing DIY. It's great if you are on a budget or you're doing demos or whatnot. But just to real quick throw the limitation of DIY is mainly that lack of objectivity and experience.
Absolutely.
As I mentioned earlier, you are invested in the song. You are used to hearing it a certain way. Your master is not going to emphasize certain things or balance it out in a way that makes it competitive and professional compared to others, potentially because you are so familiar with how it currently sounds.
You're just not going to hear it and differently enough to make those decisions. And if you're already having issues with translating, and in terms of like you go do the car test and it fails the car test, right? This is not going to help. This is not going to help because like Sean said, there's no objectivity there. There's no different perspective that's able to be shined upon.
It's probably in the same room you mixed it to. It's not even in a different room.
Exactly. So that makes it really tough. So we want to kind of give those caveats out before we start into the DIY.
It's doable. It can be
totally
great
doable
for you.
Yep.
But there are limitations to it. Just so like this, that is what you are missing out on.
Yep.
All right. Next, you were saying.
Let's do the tools. Let's go through tools first. There are some decent tools out there that are kind of arising in audio. So if you're working with a digital audio workstation, such as Logic, Pro Tools, whatever the case may be, you can download some of these and buy them because they're all paid. But iZotope has a really nice suite. It's called Ozone. Ozone is great. I've used Ozone for a really long time. I'm actually still on Ozone 5.
Really?
Just because I haven't updated because I don't use it as much as I used to.
Gotcha.
Back in the day.
I'm on 11.
But I'm definitely due for an upgrade. Because it's a nice tool to have. They have really good sounding stuff in there. But they also have this thing called Mastering Assistant in there that will actually listen to your song, develop some kind of EQ curve
AI
for
profile
dynamics.
based on
exactly. Yep. Based on your options that you're given. I think you're given 3 different options. Like it can be like, oh, you want it bright or something like that, or you want it loud, right? Like, isn't there something like that?
It used to be like that when, like in Ozone 10 or 9 or something.
Oh, did they
when
change
it? Was
it?
like, when it was like kind of preset based. It's like, hey, what are you looking for? We listen to it. We're like when it was pure algorithm of we are listening, not even listening, like we are scanning the overall balance of this mix. You want it bright. Okay, it's there or it's not there based on the curve that you selected, and then you can adjust it from there. Now it's got AI integration,
so it automatically does that.
Yeah, it'll analyze it and be like, okay, this is a rock song. This is the curve we have for rock songs, so we're gonna match to that. And then there's a simple feature of more or less of this, more or less of that, and it gets you a rough master.
Okay.
Or you can dive in and tweak things individually, but now it's more like, hey, we are analyzing it on an AI perspective.
Gotcha.
A more detailed perspective.
Sure. And that'll take you so far. To me, whether or not it serves a song is a totally different topic. It's tough for me to endorse that 100% just because I've heard it do things before and I'm not a personally big fan of it, but it's great if you're on a budget, like we said, there's time constraints and you want control over it because you can go in and fine tune the parameters too. Like I think that's great.
Yeah, they're broad under their basic understandable interface, or you can go in and adjust the details if you want to. it is a tool that I've used, and sometimes for fun, I can speak from experience. I will do a master completely from scratch with my tools, with my ears, and then for fun, I'll throw the same thing into Ozone 11 and see what the AI does.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're close, sometimes they're not close at all. Sometimes the Ozone is like, okay, that sounds. Sometimes it's like, oh no, that sounds a little bit better, or at least it sounds like I can make this better than what I had. But most of the time, it's just like, okay, it's just different, or I'm not getting exactly what I want out of it.
Sure.
Because it's not as focused for what the specific song is about.
Now,
so yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, but this also doesn't take into account a full spectrum of a project, right? Like there's no way to do that?
Correct. It has you play back the loudest part of the song, and as it plays, it analyzes, and then it comes up with a basic starting point.
Specific for that song?
Yes.
Okay.
And it specifically says, here's a starting point for this song. And as mentioned, it has like the sound profiles trying to match, and then like all the other things that it brings up inside of it, the EQ curves, the compression, the music rebalance, all that kind of stuff. And it's never meant to be like, plug it in, you're done.
Yeah.
It positions itself as a starting point. One thing I'm not necessarily a big fan of, though, is that there's probably a way to adjust it, but Ozone seems to always default to CD mastering in terms of the LUFS standard volume, like perceived volume across the whole song.
Yep.
So it always starts it way too loud.
Gotcha.
So if you are just putting it through that and you don't know what it needs to be for streaming, and that's what your goal is, then it might actually make your song worse because it's going to make it too loud, which means it's going to get decreased once it gets published. So there are things like you need to be aware of to a degree if you are going that route of a plugin.
Gotcha.
There are other routes that you...
And that makes sense too, just on a marketing perspective, because they want it to sound louder. Louder equals better to a lot of people. Yeah. And that makes sense. That's just 100%. What are you about to ask? I
was going to say, but that's just like one of the main examples of
one of many in
DAW processing mastering for DIY.
Yeah, I want to mention real quick too, because Logic has a new feature where they just came out with a mastering assistant themselves, and it's actually on the master channel itself, and you just click the button and it'll analyze it for you all the way through the track, and then it'll actually spit out something. And I just used that last week when I was kind of giving a Logic lesson, and I was like, this is pretty cool. I'm going to try to experiment with it sometimes. Yeah. It is bound obviously to Apple.
Can you edit it once it does
it? You can.
Okay, so it's not just like, here's what we think the master is.
Exactly.
That's really
so
cool.
You can do that. And I was like, that's really cool. And you're bound to Apple ecosystem with that, of course. But then you're actually double bounded because it's only for M1 chips and above for certain things, which sucks really bad if you're on Intel. So you're actually kind of like, if you have a newer Mac, you're in the clear. You're good. But if you have an older Mac like I do, you're kind of there, but still not there at the same time. And if you're on Windows, you're not there, unfortunately. But there are other tools, like Sean was about to say. These tools don't give you as many flexibilities. And the tools that I'm going to say right now is through distributors, right? So when you go to upload your song to DistroKid, you go to upload it to SoundCloud, right, or something, there's usually a checkbox there that will say, oh, we can master this for you. Or you'll get an email in the back end of things once you upload and say, hey, we can master this for you for this fee. Now you don't really get to say a whole lot.
You have no adjustments. You don't see the profile. You can't see what they're doing. You just get what you get.
And I think Lander is slightly different, where you do get 3 copies of it or something like that. And then you can be like, hey, I want this brighter. Forgive me again, because I've never used Lander myself. But it doesn't give you that fine tuning that we're talking about in iZotope,
unless
right?
you pay for their full bundle. Because then they give you their plug-in for your DAW. So it's kind of like what we were talking about with iZotope, but the Lander version of it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And these are definitely more what you see is what you get kind of tools. And if
quick and dirty.
Exactly. And if that's what you're looking for in terms of time and you're really, really on a budget, this would be the way to go about it.
It'll give you confidence that your song will sound as loud and it'll sound like it can fit within every other song on the streaming platform.
Totally.
What you don't get is the feedback on the mix and a master that specifically emphasizes the aspects of the song that you want emphasized.
Absolutely.
So it'll get you 80% of the way there, 90% of the way there. And you know, sometimes it's depending on what your career goals are, how much music you put out, and you know what you're trying to accomplish with it, or where you are in your career, that can be all you need. Just hey, I'm making, you know, especially like I know volume for hip hop and rap is a big thing. If you have a main mastering engineer, it can get real expensive
very quickly,
real quick. And also it takes time. It takes time for a person to sit down, analyze it, compare to the references, master it, send you back all the files, verify everything's good. Lander, you load it up, it's quick, you're done. Ozone, you analyze it, it's quick, it's done, make small adjustments. So if you're looking for a fast turnaround, if you're talking about something that's in the public consciousness or that just happened that you need to get out. These things do have a place.
Absolutely.
And they are just getting better.
And there's a reason why they exist, right? Because they had that place in the market where people needed that.
There's more
totally
music
valid
out there than any point in history. There's 40 to 60,000 songs uploaded to Spotify a day is the statistic. And with that much volume out there, with that much stuff getting just pushed through for people to listen to, there's definitely a market for really quick turnarounds.
Absolutely.
And quick and dirty, just put it out there products.
Totally
and that's
agree.
what this does. And there's nothing wrong with it.
Nope.
Just now hopefully have more of an understanding of what exactly it's doing. It is just taking, okay, this is your song. This is a curve. This is a sound that we've been told, like the program has been told,
and we've been
sounds
analyzed.
good. We'll analyze your track, make it fit that mold, and give it back to you.
It's a little cookie cutter, but like it works. It works, and like I'm not a fan of it myself personally. Most of the time. And like, why would we be? Because we actually do this right. But like, that's not really the reason why. But like, just you know, tonally, like it's not always the best decisions to make for the song at hand. But it works. It works though, and then like, and it works great. You know,
I'm more of a fan of it than you are.
That's fair. That's fair. And then we kind of get into the like Sean was kind of saying, like we don't have objectivity with that too, right? Like there's no objective thing that this program's really telling us. It's just kind of basing it off of what it already knows and what it's already kind of scanned. So you lose that a little bit, and that's where I think the next one kind of comes into play. You want to move on to why we should hire somebody then at this point?
I feel like we've kind of
covered it.
Let's
go over it real quick. Let's review.
Do a quick review.
Just because we just talked about doing it ourselves. So let's say you get to a point, you're like, hey, I don't like the way that Lander did this. I don't like the way that this did this. I'm going to go out and hire somebody. Well, first of all, you got to find somebody. That's number one. That's kind of tough. That can be pretty tough, especially depending on like reputation, like and like you want a good rapport with somebody. And then obviously pricing can be a big deterrent of this. And it's really hard to window shop with some of these people, you know, with some of these guys that are working like this because their turnover is so quick, and whether or not they even get back to you is another story. So that can be bottleneck on number one. But the pro is, though, you get everything that we just mentioned: the objectivity, you get the experience, you get the room, you get what was the other one? Fresh ears. You get fresh ears on it, right? Which is just fantastic.
And sometimes, potentially, you get connections.
That's a great point. That's kind of hidden.
Yeah. That's why I don't necessarily want to dive.
Nobody talks about that one, actually.
I don't necessarily want to dive too deep into it.
No, totally. Because like that's a whole can of worms.
Yeah. But there are stories of like engineers that do all the work for certain labels. Where if you like if you find them like, oh, they do a lot of stuff with Universal, and you send them their song, don't plan on this, but there is a possibility of a mastering like, oh man, I really like mastering.
It's a great point. Yeah, very hidden point.
Yeah, and maybe they'll just bring it up in conversation or talk about like, yeah, there's an indie artist sent me their song. I had a lot of fun working on it yesterday. Oh, cool, let me listen to it. Oh, cool, we'll sign them up. Like, you know, once again, don't plan on this and don't put pressure on your mastering engineer to do something like this. But that is like a hidden potential thing. Like, it's good to have connection. It's good to know people. And a mastering engineer works with a lot of different people.
Absolutely.
Could be good to know.
Yeah, because it's very high turnover for them most of the time. And that means they're talking to a lot of people all the time. Great point. Here's a con, like we already talked about, the pricing. It can get very expensive very quickly, and obviously rightly so for the expertise, right? So this all depends on like we said before, it all depends on what your goals are and exactly your budget and your time allows for. I was going to say one more thing too, but I totally just blanked on it.
Cool.
Yeah, I know. That sucks so bad, dude. That's just terrible. No, I lost it. It's gone.
That's fine.
It's gone. I'll say it after the podcast though.
Probably.
Yeah.
So places you can look is like if you just want, you know, if your goal is to get an extra set of ears, not necessarily connections or like the best quality mastering, but definitely that objectivity. You know, there's a lot of people out there on streaming, like Sound Better or Fiverr, or
absolutely,
places like that. They are mastering engineers on there. Some of them really know what they're talking about. Some of them don't. So that's always kind of a risk, but you can start looking there.
Oh,
also,
I remember it now. But
cool.
You go first.
Or you can contact any other artists that you know, like, hey, what mastering engineers do you do? Or you can look up like what engineers labels use. Look at the credits of some of your favorite songs and see if they have any mastering engineers that are consistent across those albums. Not every streaming platform and not every distributor lists those credits, but some places do. So if there's a bunch of songs that you like, try to find out who mastered those, and then you can contact that out. Because of the volume and the turnaround that a lot of these mastering engineers do, a lot of engineers that do mastering for digital releases aren't necessarily specifically label engineers or studio engineers. Like, they do a lot of stuff for anybody who necessarily asks them. They might have like good connections with and do most of their work through labels, so it might take them a while to fit you in. But a lot of times they are open to working with independent artists. So you can look at your favorite songs, find out who mastered it, and contact them by just Googling them and finding their business page.
Yep. And the one thing I wanted to add too is that the mastering engineers also take into account on how your entire project sounds together, so they will give you that cohesiveness, where opposed to AI doesn't necessarily do that. Right?
No, it looks at each song individually. Not the whole group.
Exactly. Which, so for
some situations, like we mentioned, if you are just putting out a bunch of singles like rap, hip hop, where there is high turnaround, even kind of like sometimes like there's some country artists who their whole thing is built around turnaround or folk or whatnot. If you're on the road doing some folk stuff and you just want to get it taken care of and gone, that's fine. If you're just building a bunch of singles,
absolutely,
that can be worth it. But if you are releasing an album, you definitely want somebody to look at the whole picture.
Totally. That was just my one point that I wanted to bring up too, just because you do lose that when you're doing it either DIY or automated, you know. So that's another reason to hire a pro. So if you're working with a big project, that would probably steer me automatically to a pro, just to make sure I have that cohesiveness in between.
One word of warning I will give, if you are looking to have your album mastered to vinyl, I would recommend potentially not hiring a individual or a freelance master engineer to create that vinyl master. There's only a couple of vinyl pressing plants that exist. And all of these pressing plants, to my knowledge, have an in-house mastering engineer who knows what needs to be done for that version of the press, how they create the vinyl. So it's better to, I think, rely on the pressing plant's in-house engineer who knows their system, who knows how all that stuff works to create the master specifically for the vinyl. And also, because of how dynamic streaming platforms keep their masters, if they're on like -14, -12 in that range, a lot of times it's still dynamic enough to be used as the file that the vinyl master is sent off of. So if you only have a master, not a mix, or you like how the master glues everything together, a lot of these places will ask for the digital master file to then create the vinyl master pressing off of. So if you do vinyl and you contact them, ask, do you have an in-house audio? Do you have an in-house mastering engineer? And what kind of files do they need from me? Is a digital master file okay? Do you want the mix? Like, what do you want in order to make the best contact for vinyl? Because vinyl is a whole different beast than anything else.
Absolutely.
So if you hit up somebody, so like, oh yeah, I know master stuff. I'll give you a CD and a digital and a vinyl, and when I'd be like,
Yeah. I've had people ask me about vinyl mastering before. I just say I don't do that.
I don't do that.
Like, you just got to go to somebody who knows that, you know. And hopefully one day I will be able to get to a point like that.
I just don't have
the gear or the knowledge right now, you know, and I don't have the opportunities to work on that. So it just has never come up, and usually I'll just steer somebody in a different direction myself. So it's a great point though. Great point.
So with all that being said, that's basically our episode on mastering.
Yeah. Dark art. Not so dark anymore.
Hopefully we unveiled what mastering is, made it a little bit easier to understand why it's important, where to look, on your options you have to get the song mastered, and also like just the history behind it, which I find incredibly interesting. Hopefully you did as well, because I did go on like a 5-minute ramble on it.
I love it.
But
I love it.
That's fun to me.
It is fun.
Hopefully you had fun too listening to us. And if you want more fun as well as awesome sounding music, you can hit up Brandon.
Wow, thanks, Sean. You can hit me up as soon as you want to. You can hit me up at studio222recording.com. Fill out my inquiry request form right there. And I work on all audio. I like audio. It's just fun for me. So you can hit me up for any project, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. And you can also find me on social media too. I do not respond on social media. I'm just going to say it. I just don't respond on social media, actually, from now on. I'm not even going to bring it up anymore. So
how do you spell up studio? What is it, like a E-H?
Yeah, something like that. It starts with an S, though. S-T. And I'm not even going to give my social media anymore. I thought about that yesterday. I'm like, I'm just not going to do it because I don't respond to anything on social media. So, I mean, if you find me there and you want to message me, that's fine. But if not, go to my website.
I went on Discord last time for the first time in like 6 months, and I have like a couple messages over the past like month or 3 months ago that I haven't responded to, and I'm like,
really?
I feel so bad, but also like I just don't use Discord.
Yeah, no, I'm saying I don't use Discord either.
There's too many communication platforms.
I know, it's so tough, tough. Yeah,
it doesn't work with Brandon. Definitely go to Studio 222 Recording.
But you should work with Sean.
Potentially.
If
you
right
do folk rock, acoustic, or potentially blues, you can hit me up at SW. I almost said Studio 222. You can hit me up at swsrecordings.com. Those are the genres that I specify, and I do remote mixing and mastering as well as studio stuff. I also do one-on-one business coaching or artist development coaching, which is basically this podcast, but a roadmap specifically crafted and laid out for you and your career to help accelerate you on your journey to making a living in this industry. So definitely hit me up there at swsrecordings.com.
Hell yeah, dude.
Yeah. On top of that, you can contact both of us at the same time by reaching out to the podcast if you have any things you want to specifically have us cover or look into, or just give us want us to give you feedback on what you're doing. You can hit us up at podcast@musicmakerscookbook.com. We do recommend you follow us and reach out to us on our social media platforms for the podcast.
We do.
We have YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all at musicmakerscookbook.com. No, all at just Music Makers Cookbook. We also have some stuff that we specifically put out on these platforms, like some short clips of this podcast to help get you to the juicy bits quicker, and then some more specific content that dives in deeper on these platforms. So definitely feel free to reach out there. Also, Brandon has some awesome resources on his website too for how to prepare for a studio and how to get we don't talk about that enough. You have some awesome resources on there. So if you are planning on going to a studio or just want to learn more about stuff like that, check out Brandon's resources. And I have some resources on my website that are tied to certain podcast episodes, like how to craft the 4-quadrant thing, or SMART goals, or things like that. So
fucking awesome.
If you want some resources to follow along with past episodes or just help plan out your career, definitely check those out as well.
Absolutely. That's what they're there for. They're there to help.
With that being said, thanks for joining us in the kitchen as we cooked up today. Hopefully you enjoyed the tasty meal that we served.
I think we mastered that meal.
Ha ha ha.
Bon appetit.
Bon appetit.